Welcome to Slated for Tomorrow. I'm your host, Sandy Sharma.
Hey everyone, I'm James Archer.
Yahn Bernier. Yahn, thank you for being here. He has had a very illustrious career, and we here call him father of Half-Life, if that's okay with you, Yahn. I think others have called you that too.
I think Half-Life had more than a few fathers.
For sure. Well, he's into a lot more. He's into kart racing. I just heard about diving and checking out sharks at night, and he's a generous philanthropist as well. So thank you for being here, Yahn.
Happy.
Awesome. So to get us warmed up, we're going to do a bit of a rapid fire.
Okay.
So 10 seconds, every answer. Let's go for it. Ferrari or Aston Martin?
Yeah, I think I got to say both of those are sort of in my passion footprint right now because I'm racing the Ferraris, but I'm also involved with the race team that races Aston Martins. And right now they're at Spa, which is one of the famous tracks in Europe, and they're doing qualifying.
Awesome.
All right, nice answer.
What's your Starbucks go-to order?
Just a drip coffee with no room for anything. Black coffee.
Nice.
Like my soul.
Oh, nicely done. Ideal vacation?
I think the diving trips have been great to somewhere warm and sunny. I think you need an antidote to Seattle in the winter.
Very true.
Favorite video game?
I think right now the favorite one is Hogwarts Legacy, and that game is just absolutely fantastic and fun.
Favorite place to vacation?
The most fun we had recently was actually, and it was an eye-opener, was the Sea of Cortez. The amount of sea life on display there is just absolutely insane. And until you've tried to jump into the water with a megapod of 1,000 dolphins, see if you could see them underwater with your goggles on. It was just an eye-opening experience that amount of beauty was like sort of accessible on a pretty quick flight from Seattle. So I enjoyed that a lot.
We should go. Podcast should be done there.
Absolutely.
So let's kind of just jump into a little bit more about, like, again, who is Yahn? And so what are some of your passions?
I think I always, as a kid, had video games as a passion, but never thought of it as a job. So I went to college, studied chemistry, which my bigger brother had done. Didn't want to be a chemist, so I went to law school, knowing that I'd become a patent attorney, so I could at least dabble in chemistry. And then I ended up doing only polyester chemistry patent applications for a long time, and I really was more interested in games and software. And so found a way to escape the clutches of a career. And found my way into video games. So I'd say video games has been a lifelong passion. The car racing has been over the last 5 or 6 years, something I've gotten into, and I wish I had found it earlier because I will say that the young people in their 20s are crushing me because they just have the reflexes and they don't have the fear of death that as you get older and wiser, you start to meter out your risks a little bit more. The diving, I think I found 5 or 6 years ago, and my daughter has gotten really into it. And so I just dive in support of her passion for it. She's just the most. Play the guitar a little bit. Travel in general has always been a passion for my family. And even our daughter, we took her on a plane when she was 2 months old. And
nice.
She was always a seasoned traveler, not the kid kicking the seat in front of me.
Do you feel like through the explorations of your passions, you were able to find your purpose? And what do you feel like your purpose is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think my wife has been more clear about where her philanthropic sort of passion is. For me, I've been a little bit along for the ride. I know it's not in politics or something like that, but I think experiences with family and friends tend to be the memorable milestones in life for me. And so although I have things that I derive enjoyment from, I found in general that the passion is around experiences with friends. So I was just telling Sandy, we went to Japan, but we brought basically an entourage of 16 of us.
It's so much fun when you do that with people.
It was great. So we had our own little cocoon of fun, interesting, diverse set of people, actually, some from school, some from different walks of life, some from work. And we got to experience if you haven't been to Japan as an American, it is just so completely different than being in the United States. I think I inherited this a little bit from my father, who had a little bit of the wanderlust and liked to travel the world. He was a big ham radio guy and talked to people on the International Space Station, and would go station himself in countries in Africa and be the only guy there. Talk to people. So he read that. My brother is a little bit like this too. He can't sit still. He lives in Key West. We call him the mayor of Key West because he's hyper extroverted social guy.
I love this.
He just can't sit still. And so I have inherited a little bit
of that.
Much to the bemusement or worse of my wife, who's just like, can't we just sit home? I want to go see, experience.
You realize life is short and
Very short.
and
Enjoy it.
that sands of time you have to take advantage of while you have.
Yeah, I mean, my parents, both have passed away. Both, I would say, relatively young. So it's like maybe the genetics aren't in favor of like living to 100. I mean, we can make certain choices in life that make that a little more easy. So I want to. I mean, it's sort of the FOMO thing where you've got to like go out there and make the experiences happen. And like,
Live your life.
and working has been a great experience. And Valve it's ruined me from ever working anywhere else. And I still want to do that, but I want to do other things. I don't want to do the thing where you front load your life with work, deferring all the quote unquote fun stuff for later. I want to kind of find a way to interleave it and
balance it.
And with the company, the way it's structured. And people who've been there for a while and getting stuff done, we're afforded some flexibility and just going off with the family and doing your thing, checking out, and then coming back and getting a bunch of
nice. I do want to go back to the trail of chemist to patent lawyer to breaking away. Tell us about that story. What was that breakaway?
Yeah, I mean, so
how did you do it?
I mean, the chemistry thing was, I sort of fell into chemistry. I went to Harvard for undergrad, and it actually went into Harvard thinking I was going to be a Latin, like classics major, and be a professor. And then I realized there wasn't a gold pot at the end of the rainbow or a job even. I mean, maybe archaeology would be almost worse, but I mean, Indiana Jones being the one of a kind. I realized that it wasn't very practical, and I had the option to do many, many things, but along the way, because my brother was a PhD chemistry student at the time, I just studied chemistry as a major, but all of my extracurricular and electives were computer science classes. And in fact, I was the teaching assistant for the really hard systems programming class just for fun. And so when I got to the end of the chemistry degree, I kind of realized I didn't want to be a chemist, but there was a woman working in one of the labs I was in. Her father was a patent attorney. She said, hey, if you don't want to be a chemist, but you're interested in taking your science and doing something interesting with it, you ought to consider going to law school and becoming a patent attorney. So, okay, off to law school I go. I think I applied to a few schools, got into like Boston University, University of Florida, was from Florida, knew what I was going to end up doing, so it didn't kind of matter that much where I went to school. So I became the in-state student, went down to Florida, had an awesome time in law school, got hooked up with a firm in Atlanta called Needle and Rosenberg. Those guys took a risk on me and started my law career. Did that for about 5 years, did all kinds of interesting trademark and patent and trade secret litigation cases, and did a lot of patent prosecution, so I understood IP really well. On the side, wrote a editor for the Quake game that became one of the popular, sort of like a CAD tool to make levels for the Quake game. And so at the time, Valve was a startup. Valve started in August of 1996, and they were working on the first game, Half-Life, and they had licensed the Quake engine from id Software down in Texas. And they had their kid working on an internal editor, and he just wanted to go back home to Canada. And so they had other people in the company using my tool surreptitiously, because it was kind of like, hey, you need to, eat your own dog food and use the tool that we're building internally. But he wasn't really servicing them, and I was like building this thing overnight. And but as an aside, I was dating my future wife at the time. She had no idea I had this side hobby of coder. But I was writing a lot of like interesting UI code, and it was programmer UI for sure, but it was a very powerful tool in the end. And two of the employees at that fledgling Valve company had the co-founder, Mike Harrington. There was Gabe and Mike were the two co-founders. Mike emailed me out of the blue, software development opportunity. Delete, thought it was spam. Then I got an email from these guys a couple days later. Hey, did you get an email from Mike? Oh, let me fish it out. Yeah. Okay, I'm practicing law for 5 years. I'm probably going to be a partner in this law firm. Pretty good existence being a lawyer. It pays well, especially an IP attorney. I mean, compensation in that business went crazy after it.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was like, this would be a big risk. My wife was an attorney at Alston Bird, which is a big Atlanta firm, as a high-powered estate planning attorney. So we were just dating at the time. So I'm like, hey, I've got this sort of company in Seattle that's interested in me taking a huge risk, which for attorneys, like if you've worked with attorneys, like
they don't like risk.
Well, it's very interesting. Like really good attorneys don't tell you no. They say, if you want to do that, here's how we get you there, and you'll have low exposure, right? Bad attorneys tell you no. But attorneys are risk averse. And I'd say the process of going to law school is one of those things where people say taking LSD changes the way your brain chemistry works. I haven't done it, But if you, I think law school is the
does
same way, because look at every situation as an assessment of risks and liabilities.
That would be LSD being law school degree.
Yeah, exactly.
Same LSD.
Oh my God.
Very nice. So you get this way of looking at the world, and I think it unfortunately people get very conservative in the way that they assess, like everything looks like a risk, and so they kind of shut down. And I think this is sort of like the startup dilemma kind of thing as well, where the companies that are established don't keep taking risks because it's nobody ever got fired for choosing IBM or whatever it is.
Correct.
And so I took the risk, right? And the senior partner in the law firm, I remember very particularly on my going away, he basically cried on my shoulder. He said that this law firm was going to be your firm when we retired, but you have to go do this thing. Actually, my best friend at the time said, "You're an idiot. What are you effing doing?" And so anyway, I go to Valve. It's like a tiny company of like, I don't know, 12 or...
Wait, hold on a second. I'm going to stop there for a second. So the senior partner at that law firm actually encouraged you.
He said, you have to go do it.
That I think is really cool, is where an advisor in your life, while it might help them out, actually
still look out for you.
The difference of a real champion and advisor is like, you got to go look after you.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I think, in my role, we don't have to go into the tangent too much, but as an advisor, the best advice you can do is enable people to go out and make their own decisions, whether they're mistakes or not. You can't
and they own them.
You can't project your values onto theirs.
That's a really good one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so he said, you've got to go do it. And like in my mind, it was, okay, I always can go back to being a patent attorney. It's very secure. There would be no problems getting a job. I have experience already.
Mm-hmm.
I'm marketable in that. So I can take this risk. And then I had to convince my girlfriend at the time to quit her job and move to Seattle.
Nicely done.
And do the startup. She said, well, there better be a commitment on this. So I think we ended up getting engaged, like sort of in the process of moving out, and got married, literally got married on the day that our first game, Half-Life, went to replication.
Love it.
Nice.
Which wasn't supposed to happen, of course, but, came to Valve, actually very interesting, came out to Valve in January of 1998, interviewed, and of course, as to be a programmer, not to be an attorney. And of course, the people doing I had to call the office manager, say, should I wear a tie? And she's like, God, no, you're going to scare them if you wear a tie. So I show up there and as casual as I could muster at the time. East Coast was much more formal than was.
Very much.
So I show up and I think they were like, who the hell is this attorney? Ha, ha, ha. And so they asked me all their programming questions. And I remember one of those questions, one of the very senior engineers, Ken Birdwell, asked me a question about, it's kind of like you have a ball that rolls along a hill and it goes down a dip and back up. And then it comes out at the same height, gets some speed, up and down and up. And it's like, okay, which ball is going faster and which one gets to the end sooner?
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of like this, it took physics. It was like this curl integral, like intuition. But I think I answered it in like 30 seconds. He's like, got so mad at me because he said only Gabe had ever answered that question even faster than that. So we went on to other things. So anyway, I got, I think, unanimous hires, despite they were very skeptical
of a lawyer
actually come.
And you could also do counsel if you need at the very beginning to protect them.
Well,
I was teasing.
We'll come back to that though, because that ended up being super useful in the early days of the company. So I come into the company because I've written an editor for Quake games. But of course, there are only 5 programmers at the company, and we really needed to get the networking and multiplayer code going. So I actually never wrote any code in the editor for the company. Other people did that, and I worked on sort of the game engine and became very, very expert, I would say, at the client-server networking layer that we use in the games. Even to this day, and I'm still that guy. I've got helpers now, but I'm still, and every day I still get to go in and fire up the Visual Studio and write code, and that is the thing that
look at you.
I mean, it's awesome. If you're a person who likes to play with puzzles, then I think programming might be the right.
He would love him and Tanmay. Him and Tanmay would hit it off. We'll do a sidebar after that, but he was one of our guests. He was programming when he was 5 years old. He's 20 years. He'll be 20 and 18, but he's this prodigy in AI. Next level. But he built his own multiplications tool when he was like 8 years old to do his homework for him.
Yeah, I could tell you my sort of origin story.
Yeah, we'd love to hear that.
So I was born in 1968, and right around 1980, when I was about 12 years old, I went to 7th grade, and I had a very amazing, you talk about mentors, very amazing teacher. He was this guy, Mr. Carpenter. He was his first or second year teaching in junior high school. And he saw that I was good at math, but he had brought in some punch cards that you could do Fortran in. And he said, I want you to like write this algebra problem in Fortran, and I'll take those punch cards and I'll run them through whatever the school, or he went to some company and ran them through. But like, it got my head turning. And then somehow from books alone, because I couldn't afford a computer right away, taught myself how to program. And then I would go down to Radio Shack and fix their TRS-80s when people would put them in weird loops. And I'd put the basic programs in, make it, and put a game on it or whatever. And I became sort of like their service department, unpaid, unwelcome probably. But I just was so obsessed with it. And then the video arcade thing happened in the 80s, and I really, really wanted to build Donkey Kong. So I got like a TI-99 4A at one point, and then a Atari 800.
That's the history. They were the original.
And it's like, so the people who grew up, Meyer, who grew up with that, I get those people. Those are like, that's my tribe right there. And like, we all learned how to do 6502 assembler, and here we go. And now I'm like, I think the skill set I honed at that point was the one that kind of let me get through all the way to Valve. Right?
What would you say is your professional superpower? And that maybe sets you apart from everyone else. And maybe it's exactly what I'm thinking.
I mean, I think I don't take myself very seriously. So I think part of my role at Valve actually is, I would say, on the HR side and recruiting. And I think, you can get into this trope of engineers who don't have a lot of soul for other people. And I find that other people are fascinating systems as well. And so I try to be like very empathetic to the situations people get into, because I think the tech business is a very hard place sometimes, and I think a lot of people feel like an imposter at times, when in fact that's probably just a natural feeling of being around really smart people that you can learn from. And so I try to be like the guy who helps new people find their place and their passion and how they can be effective. I mean, Valve in some ways is a very difficult place for that, because it's just a very unstructured company. We don't have sort of an official mentoring setup. We don't do summer internships because we just don't have the people to kind of run that kind of program, although we sort of bantered back and forth, bandied about on whether we should do that or not, because I think we're missing opportunities to sort of hone some diamonds in the rough. And we certainly get a lot of young people coming out of like DigBen or other, every college has gaming as a focus at this point. So you get a lot of people who are sort of vocationally trained, not just like college, like meta learning how to like learn new things trained. So they come in with some skills, and so I think they're eminently more trainable than back in the day, where it was very hard to suss out who was ready for prime time or not. So I think advancing people's careers has always been sort of this other satisfying thing that I think I've done a decent job at least within the confines of.
What do you use as a technique there? Like, what is it?
Knowing that there's not one actual solution to how to solve any problem, and that the best thing I can do is not tell somebody the answer on how to solve something.
Let them explore.
Let them make mistakes. And so my general response when they say, hey, what do you think about this, is like, well, I think you should try it and measure it, right? See how it goes. Yes. And I think a lot of people are not like that. They have one way in their head, and they fixate, and they want to top down things onto people. And I think it's just like the sort of the flip side of like the way we've structured the company is to try to, as little as possible, top down anything onto any group of people. Instead, ask them to just go and survey a group of people who they think are smart thinkers in the space and see if they can get consensus if they're stuck. Right? It just works really well for the company.
Let's dig a little deeper into that, because that's a very interesting concept. It's not top down, it's more outside in, right? Talk to people who might be users or in the same space, and then measure it. Is that pervasive in Valve? And do you think good companies do that?
I think good companies do it naturally. I think we've been somewhat formal about it. I mean, if your listeners are very interested, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, we put out what we called the Valve Company Handbook, and you can just Google Valve Company Handbook. And it kind of talks about the management philosophy at that time, with part of the philosophy being we're willing and probably will change the way we think about it. But a lot of the philosophy of the company is to avoid having a rigid hierarchical way to make decisions within the company, because we are not the military or a manufacturing company usually where we need a chain of command like that. We are a creative company, and middle management layers in a creative company, I think, destroy the ability for the artists to be creative, because most of the company is artists.
Yeah.
And then the next most is programmers, and very little is business marketing, legal, PR. It's just the way the company is structured. And so for the most part, the way things get done is a cohort of, I mean, it's kind of like a Michael Crichton novel where you've got people with disparate skills and the one wild card come together to solve the problem before the natural disaster hits. Okay, Valve is a little bit like that when we spin things up. You've got to have modeler, an artist, a level designer, a game designer, a couple programmers, an audio person to go off and prototype something to show other people that they should spend their time on it, and that thing can then get a snowball of attention within the company. I mean, the cliche is that the ideas are cheap, and that is absolutely the truth. There are way more ideas than personnel who can do them. And so you've got to have the sort of nexus of an idea that people can see where the finish line is. So it has to have enough polish. I think some people are very bad at looking at abstract gameplay and extrapolating Call of Duty from like a little triangle with like going pew pew.
It's not going to work.
It just doesn't work. So you have to get it far enough along where they can kind of see where it's going.
The vision.
But when the vision is obvious and the little nugget of gameplay is there, that's when these things pick up steam and move forward, become products. And so I think
when you say pick up steam, pun was not intended.
Not a pun, but it's a sad, ugly pun. But you kind of see how you get going somewhere. And of course, we have existing IPs to service, and we've sort of transitioned the company to be more, I'd say, software as a service kind of model. We're continuously shipping. So we've gotten very good at that with things like Steam that allow us to deploy or undeploy if we make mistakes code very, very easily. And so so we try to avoid that sort of waterfall risk of like a huge product where you spent years and hundreds of millions of dollars developing something and you just push it out the door and see what happens. It's better to sort of be incremental. Again, it has to be good enough to have the snowball effect, even with the external users. We go that way.
Tell us about the successes and failures and what you've learned from them. And does this theory get revalidated there? I mean, is that...
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the early success of Half-Life I would attribute to Gabe. Gabe in particular, a little bit of an argument with Mike about this, about not shipping it until it's ready, because at the time in the late 90s, the way products were sold was through like a retail package, like a Best Buy or a GameStop, something like that. There wasn't any direct online anything at the time. And so you needed to be in the front of the newspaper ad flyer for Best Buy as the top 1, 2, or 3 game. So if your target is to just push it out the door because you're running out of money or something, and you're not number 1 or 2,
and also maybe timing holiday,
you need to be there for Christmas as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And
holiday
so
season.
I think the effort had been to ship in Christmas time in 1997. I came in 98. We were going to ship in the summer. Okay, we shipped just in time, like Thanksgiving time of 1998. But we had waited until the game was really good and not succumb to the pressure, even from our publisher was Sierra Online at the time, to try to push that thing out the door before it was totally ready and polished. And those last few months on any software development is when, I mean, I hate to use the word synergy, but it's when
it all comes together.
Cool stuff happens. And when one cool example I can think of is like the audio people had figured out a way to use the PCM audio data to drive the mouths. So now you had this sort of automatic lip sync based on what the characters are saying. It didn't have to be animated. And they just put that feature in the 11th hour. And I'm not saying it's the defining feature of the game, but it was like one of those things that would have been cut to the floor if you were actually like just trying to ship as quickly as possible. And so we learned that lesson on Half-Life 1. And then it took us 6 years to do Half-Life 2 because we were such perfectionists and also had this weight of thinking about what our audience expected from another Half-Life game, how successful it needed to be. And I don't know, I mean, I think we have really smart people and we made really good decisions, and we ended up shipping a game that was, I'd say, even better than Half-Life 1. So, okay, is it luck, or is it part of the process, or is it the people? I think it's a bit of all those things, or culture.
The culture now,
and the thing that was bad about that is that it was such a big risk to queue up that much work for that long. And I think, it's like the software development nightmare hell thing that happened right after Half-Life, which is like everybody went off and wanted to build features in technology without customers in a game design, right? It's like the worst possible software development.
Doing it in my silo.
It reminds me of I forget which Halo game came out it was Guardians or one of them that like they just tanked so bad because they focused way too much on the multiplayer and not the story of Master Chief. And the whole reason people loved Halo was the Master Chief story.
Right.
Like that was why they loved, and you can't, they didn't want the campaign to be an afterthought. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Multiplayer games that have multiplayer and single player, there's a tension on the design about where to focus the efforts. In a lot of games, you can see one or the other aspect is definitely tacked on, right?
Yes.
Some games get it right on both aspects, but that's...
Let's drill into that a little bit. So the narrative and the storytelling around the characters and how that helps build community and relationships. And where is it today? Where do you see it going?
I mean, I think it's, for the Half-Life game, it's been very obvious. I think the company is very good at building characters that you can identify with. The single-player games are very interesting because you are the protagonist in those games. But like a game like Dota or Counter-Strike, you're just a generic CT or
That's
T.
another.
But like Dota, you have all these heroes, but they, like, which one you play varies based on what the other team is choosing for heroes. Other than there are roles within the team where I'm gonna be like a tank guy, or I'm gonna be a support guy, or whatever it's gonna be. And that's true with Team Fortress as well. And so I think from a story design, the multiplayer game stuff, it doesn't have to have really as much of a story. From the single player, it has to really have a story that gets people interested in playing it as a sort of a solo exploration adventure kind of thing. I think we've done a good job with that. I mean, I think we'll keep going and exploring down that universe as well. I know we've got like multiplayer games in development. We're in the process of sort of revving Counter-Strike to Counter-Strike 2 right now. We just opened up a little bit of spots in a public beta, and the demand has been crazy. But the team is doing a really nice job with in not getting out over the skis and trying to really change the fundamental game, because it's like kind of like the Madden thing where like people just understand the fundamental game, and you have to keep refreshing it. But if you just tried to go out and make everything better all at once, you would make it just
not going to happen.
There's a reason why there's like FIFA has had 20, where Madden's had like and people just keep buying it, and new generations keep buying it because it just, the basics make sense.
Basically, I mean, it's interesting because they also swap in the rosters with the actual players.
Yeah.
So I think people have a reason, or like Formula One games, they've done a really good job in the last few years of like getting those things out while they're timely, and they've added to their story mode, and you're the team manager mode, and then the racing has gotten better and better and better. I mean, if you want to talk about like the intersection of one passion and the other, for me, it's like car racing, and the simulators we used to prepare for car racing, they are like driving the actual
real car. Yeah.
And I'm getting ready to go race at Le Mans in the support race for the 24-hour race.
Nice.
So we get very little track time. And so I'm on the simulator a ton. And also at Montreal during the F1 weekend, I'm going to race on the F1 track in the Challenge Series.
Nice.
So these are tracks I'm going to get very like an hour of practice on that. So I have to be on the simulator every day for like an hour trying to get ready for it. And so the advancements in like that tech, the games are just they're games, but they're just so close to real that you can actually...
Tell us about the simulators. What's changed? Like what's great about them now?
I would say the VR headsets are the key thing. And also the steering wheels, they're not these little plastic things anymore. They're
super
something,
tactile response.
Yeah, they're called direct drive. And so it's like an electric motor that can do like 25 Newton meters of torque. So it can like break your thumbs if you're not careful, right? So it feels like it's exactly, it doesn't have an end point. It can just keep giving you force no matter how far you turn the wheel. So they feel like a real steering wheel. The wheels themselves look like an actual steering wheel in the car. And then the brake systems are hydraulic to an extent. That's the one system where I think there's still more to be done. And then you can get platforms for sim racing that move. I don't find that interesting. I think the ones that have belt tighteners, where it makes you feel like you're in braking or something, like those are really good. But the VR headset's the number one thing, because in the race car, it is so claustrophobic and you're so tightly constrained, but there's still a little bit of play in the way your head can move and where your eyes can look. That's different than just looking at monitors in front of you with the steering wheel. And so I think you get the sensation of looking beyond the A-pillar if you need to find an apex in a way that it feels completely real.
Very
and so,
real.
I mean, I've been using the Valve Index because it's the best headset out there for that. I mean, it's a little bit of an expensive toy, but I think it's an advantage. I mean, I think, in the paddock in my series has about 70 drivers. I'd say maybe half of them are on sims, and half of those use VR. But all of us who've converted and have the iron stomach for VR have loved it. It's just been great.
Tell me more about that, because it's kind of hardware meets software, and virtual reality is kind of the way it's heading. So it's going to keep getting better. We know that. But what inflection points happened to get it to where it is today?
Well, I think the main inflection point that happened was the cell phone displays got compact enough with high enough refresh rate to sort of support it. And so we did a lot of research in the early days of VR at Valve. We were working with Oculus when it was the Kickstarter to help them out. And Michael Abrash, who's now the chief technology guy at Meta, was at Valve at the time. And we sort of had gone down a different road into AR a little bit. But the advent of the cheap displays with high refresh rate that you could just sort of do experiments with. And then the other thing that was necessary was a way to track that in 3D space. And we ended up hiring a guy named Neil Konzen in the early days of this. And he had been at Microsoft with Gabe back in the day, but he was an interesting guy because he had gone to Ferrari's Formula One team, and he was Michael Schumacher's data guy. So he was the guy who, when they put sensors on the car, was able to like get that data. So he figured out a way to track the position of the headset to within like less than a millimeter and like 0.1 arc seconds of rotation. It was so very, very precise. And it was a combination of sort of gyroscopic stuff on it and outside in. Like if you've looked at the Index or the Oculus, it has on it these light receptors basically positioned rigidly in certain spots. And as the way that at least the Index one works is you've got a little rotating hard drive motor that rotates very precisely with a laser, invisible laser. And as those photons come across the device, the timing of when each sensor gets set lets you locate it in space with high school trigonometry. Smart people do. And then we do a little bit of things, something called sensor fusion, which is you take a little bit of gyroscopic data on the headset about like accelerations and kind of fine tune that gross measurement from the outside in tracking. So I think the inflection point was the display. I think the next inflection point will be getting rid of the tether, getting rid of the need for external base stations where the device itself is just able to sense. I mean, it's very interesting if you look at like even this room, like it could be hard against the black wall to get a good read, but like you got things on, then it can really like locate itself within space. So you have to deal with all those kinds of problems. And then of course, form factor, they're hot still, they're heavy, they need a computer. Yeah. So when they become, I think like an Oakley pair of sunglasses or embedded in your eyeball as a lens or something like that, then it'll be really interesting. I mean, we're going to go, I think we're going to end up with being sort of cyborgs in an interesting way down the road, right?
So untethering, we've been talking about for a long time. And downsizing, we've been talking about for a while too. What's preventing both of those right now?
I mean, I think it's just the technology. I mean, so the tethering, the amount of data that needs to come to the headset, unless the compute is on the headset, is just a lot. And there aren't a lot of technologies like the Wi-Fi bandwidth spectrum only can carry so much data. And if you talk about having multiple users within a space, you're kind of host, right? And so we need to kind of solve those problems. And I think line of sight, I mean, people, you know, the guys from RAD, Jeff Roberts, he used to have a microwave internet. He had a direct line. Actually, there's a funny story about one of the international tournaments down at Key Arena we got DDoS on the actual internet link, but we had a microwave line directly from the stadium to like the building, like the Westin or whatever, downtown. So we were able to keep it going, and they had no idea how we got a link going because the bad actors thought they had shut us down on the internet, but like actually we had a different link.
That is so cool. I want to, Sandy, if I may, you know, a lot of people I think are still, you know, worrying about screen time and whatnot. And I wanted to talk about, you know, you've been in this industry a while. I have obviously my own opinions that I think video gaming, or obviously anything in moderation, but I think like video gaming, it definitely helped me. I built friendships and relationships with people across the world when Halo 2 came out and did multiplayer, and that was really, really cool. But what is your thoughts and takes on the importance of having video games available to people and how that can impact society?
Yeah, I mean, there's a point where people maybe are spending too much time playing games that don't have, they were getting anything sort of like beneficial from it. But like, you know, I have a kid who's 16 years old now, and we didn't really have to limit screen time with her because a lot of the times what she was doing was drawing on her iPad or something like that. And so it wasn't sort of like, I would say it was more mindful playing rather than mindlessness. I think games have this place in being escapist entertainment, like just like movies or TV shows or anything else like that. And I think there is a point where people can go too far down that road, but I think you do bring up a very good point, which is the social aspect in a lot of the games is sort of, it replaces going and hanging out at the mall for a lot of kids. They just go online with their group of friends. I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, I think there definitely are dangers to online communities with communication that you have to be aware of as a parent. I mean, it's just like, and it's very hard as a developer to know what kind of things to put into your technology to prevent, or even if it's possible to prevent people from being griefers and trolls, right? And that's the thing, I think, when parents find out that their kids are subjected to some pretty horrible things online. I mean, again, I grew up and, went to the playground in 6th grade and heard all the same things.
I was about to say just that. Every generation feels that this next generation is cursed, right? And they're doing the wrong things. And then you play back and like, what was I doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like all sufficiently advanced technology is magic. And to our parents' generation, computers were magic and therefore must be all evil. And I think that may be a little bit true now, even with the current set of parents where if my kiddo is playing a lot of games, there must be something nefarious going on in there. And don't get me wrong, there can be some bad things going on, but I think for the most part, it's a very positive space for people to play in. And you mentioned before we got on air about Roblox, but like that actually I think is a great example of they're not playing a game so much as building things.
Yeah.
It's like the same as playing with Tonka toys in an erector set, but even actually more advanced because it could be that they're honing a skill in designing experiences for other people, gameplay-wise, that becomes a career down the road, right?
What I thought was also really cool for me, Age of Empires 2. I don't know if you remember the Age of Empires series, but that they put a lot of time and effort into the historical factness of it.
And Civilization, right? You can actually, but by osmosis, you can learn something.
No, that you could choose. Did you want to be Genghis Khan? And I chose,
then you got to learn the character.
But in my high school, my middle school, I wasn't learning about Genghis Khan, but here I was learning about him conquering all these different places and then the Ottoman Empire. And it was really cool to do world history.
Yeah, no, my son's passion around cars and the amount he knows about cars is because of Forza, and he just loves it, right? And then became a passion. Is he pursuing a career there? No, but it's an interesting passion.
But the thing about GTA and like Cyberpunk, those places are incredibly real.
So real.
And so you can actually...
Even visiting places.
I'd say in a more or less safe way, act out some crazy thing and there's no consequence. You're just screwing around, right? I think people miss that distinction very much. We used to see, I had the honor to go listen to the Supreme Court arguments in the Schwarzenegger case, the California case about the ratings on video games. And it was super interesting because they wanted to put more, there was this feeling that video game violence leads to real violence.
Yeah, that there was a direct correlation.
It's actually the opposite. Like there's never been any evidence of that. And the thing that leads to real violence is like socioeconomic issues.
Nature,
parenting, whatever. But it was not the influence of media. And I would say that in general, and if it was like, the first question was Justice Kagan. She's like, or that actually was Scalia. He's like, why is this any different than Grimm's fairy tales? I mean, you read Grimm's fairy tales, it's awful, okay?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean people who read it are going to go out and be serial killers. And Justice Kagan said, yeah, I used to play Mortal Kombat with my law clerks.
Yeah.
And, the finishing moves in Mortal Kombat are incredibly violent. But like the ability to separate sort of fantasy from reality and like, this isn't really telling you to go do.
That's a different part of the brain.
Crazy. It's just like over the top, violent entertainment.
Let's stay on the positive theme here. It does transcend race, generation, culture, right? And it binds people together. They learn about each other. They appreciate it. They build empathy. Do you believe in that? And is it growing more and more?
It is. I mean, the video game business is just a huge juggernaut. And we look sort of at our games and think about the demographics, but those have changed. They've skewed older. There are more women involved in gaming. It's hard to suss out whether they're BIPOC cliques, but I think there are cliques of people playing from different cultures in the games. And so you have to, I think you want to build a game environment that's protective of people who've historically been sort of marginalized in some way. But that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is to build something really entertaining and fun. And and let people go and play out a different kind of fantasy that they have. Right?
Yeah, but do some games and some gaming companies have a purpose or an agenda they're trying to drive, even if it's positive? Is there something like that, you think, or it just kind of naturally evolves?
I mean, I think it's like movies for me. It's like the purpose is to bring people a little bit of joy, maybe teach them a little bit, give them an escape from a lot of existence is tedious and harsh. And so games are, I think, an escapism tool, and I think it's a super valuable tool.
It's an outlet. It's a great
outlet. It's a great outlet. If you're stressed out or something, just go play a game for a little bit. You get your mind off whatever's going on. Same with driving a race car or whatever it is, or going kickboxing or
Tell us a little bit about the stats. How is it evolving? What are you seeing around? Just entertain our audience with some of that, like some crazy numbers that they haven't heard before.
The thing is about Counter-Strike was started as a mod for our Half-Life game engine back in like the late 90s, and we sort of hired the guys who did it in like 1999, and then kind of revved it for a while, but that game is actually bigger now than it ever has been. It's hugely successful. For Valve in particular, I think we got really interested in movie making at one point. I actually worked on a tool called Source Filmmaker, which was very interesting, using the game assets and the game engine to do, I would say, like previs for movies. And that tool got showed to like Spielberg at one point. He's like, we could get rid of the real actors, So, and I think we were nominated for like a technical achievement award at the Oscars even for that tool. And we did all the shorts. Even now, a lot of our advertising material that features in-game stuff is put together with that tool, because it's sort of like the garage band of building your own videos, but a professional it was built by professionals for professionals. So it's a little bit of After Effects as well. It's a little bit high-end and sort of approachable. And so we had this sort of interest in Hollywood. We've talked on and off over the years about many of the Valve IPs becoming movies, and we've always said this in a very interesting way. We don't care about making money. We do care about a bad display of our IP. So we've always wanted to retain creative control in some way over the script, over who the director is.
And how it plays out, yeah.
So you don't want to do a Halo TV series, what they did and completely destroyed.
I mean, some of the video game stuff, like the Tomb Raider movies, I think overall have been pretty good. And then there's been just a minefield of creators of terrible that and I think it's because the model of Hollywood is not to operate this way. The model of Hollywood, as far as I can tell, is to option your IP exclusively and then farm it out to a scriptwriter of their choice, and they're in control of everything.
So predict the next one that should be a Hollywood movie.
Well, the one that everybody's talking about right now is The Last of Us as a series. And in fact, if you played the game, they basically built the game.
Yeah, they did.
But it's cool to see that.
Yeah. So which one is next? Give us a prediction. One that's not in the books yet. Which one would you like it to be?
Yeah, I'd like to see one of ours.
God of War.
God of War would be great.
Are we going with that?
Skyrim.
Yeah, I don't think that one's gonna go. That's too big. There isn't like a sort of central character to get behind there. You're kind of building your own story in that one, so I think that'd be harder. Obviously, Harry Potter's all been done at this point. I mean, I think Last of Us Part 2 will be great when they do that. I'm sure they're signed up to do that already. I'd like to see one of ours. I mean, I think the Portal IP would be cool as a movie, and really fun and edgy enough where people would kind of understand it. So, I don't know.
I'm going to take us back to VR, AR, the noise Meta is making in the market right now. Where do you see all that going?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to predict. They have a huge team, and I kind of understand why they want to get there, because if there is a there, and they can sort of control that, then it's financially going to be really good for them. But man, they've been spending money down this effort.
Lots of money.
And the thing is, like, not to criticize what they've done so far, but like, I really feel like the metaverse, if it happens, probably looks like a video game.
Okay.
Which means it probably comes from a video game company and not from a social media company. And Valve to me has always been the testament that you don't need a lot of people to build something amazing, and more people in software development is bad.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Once you get above a certain number of people, the projects become
What is it? What's the number for you
I
guys?
mean, I think on any one team, more than 100 is bad. It's based on humans' ability, their
It is a
own
tribe
social
thing.
graph,
It's
right?
a
How many
tribe.
people can you keep track of in your head?
150 is the
At
upper limit.
150 is the limit, right? And so I'd say be well under that number and you can run circles. I mean, I think a 20-person team can run circles around a 100-person team usually. Sometimes you need to scale up, but we've been very careful. Anytime the equation says we need hundreds of people to reevaluate what dumb thing are we?
What do you think? So you said less than 100.
150 is the upper
150
limit.
would be
Anyway.
max, but I'd say for us, less than 100. It's just like it especially without the structure. I said we don't have a middle. Without a structure, the communication channels become too burdensome. It just kind of falls apart if it's too big.
Well, that was how it's just like how the military operates, right? You have platoon commanders, and then you have commanders of those platoons, multiple platoons. But like any point in time, like they have direct people, and then they have the commander's intent, and then they can operate in that way.
Yeah, we sort of have the opposite. We have the platoons, but nobody above that.
Really?
Yeah, they're
Well,
flat.
on the battlefield, you don't want to show your badge because you get shot.
Yeah.
So we just don't
The
have
valve
those
is
people.
just flat.
It's
which
as
is
flat
beautiful.
as flat as can be.
Wasn't that like Zappos, or was
Well,
that?
okay, Zappos is Zappos did something called Halocracy, but they tried to retrofit it, and they basically said, well, if you don't like it, get the F out. And I think 40% of the people did, but I think it's very hard culturally to come in after the fact and go from hierarchy to flatness, because in a lot of ways, people's internal self-worth when they have a title and a position of authority is tied to that. And so if you never started with that, which we
You're
never
born as a flat culture. That's how you. Yeah.
but if you tried to take that away, you're going to have some bad outcomes, I think. And so I think Zappos was the case where they tried to sort of retrofit it. I don't know where they ended up on it, but it just sounded painful to listen to what they were doing. I understand why Tony wanted to. I think Tony passed away, I think, right?
He did a long
why
time
he
ago.
wanted to do that, but I'm not sure. You would almost have to start a new company and say, this is how we're going to run it, and I'm going to step back from running.
Do you think all role, like, I feel like, so here's my perspective, is that, can any role be like that, or do you need some type of structure? So I think when you're working in game development, everyone is probably delivering something like tangibly designing or coding, and so as a result of that, you're like, all right, well, you're going to chop off that part, cool, good, and then you trust they do it, and if they don't, they're fired, you bring in a new person. Whereas like maybe in a corporate where you have accounting and finance, like you can't just do flats, maybe.
It's the nature of the deliverable of games, right? And so I think what you've described about is you have people who are what we call individual contributors, and then you have people who are we call group contributors, and we may need somebody to run a Gantt chart or a schedule for something to make sure it happens. But even inside the company, we make sure that person doesn't get a special title, special compensation, or power.
there you
right?
go.
And by power is that they can't tell these people what to do.
They all feel like peers.
You're behind schedule. Are you making good decisions? Everybody can ask those questions, but they don't get put into like a hierarchy. But that doesn't mean that ad hoc there isn't like somebody running a schedule. I think you have to have that to move forward in software.
So the responsibilities happen. You don't have to build a hierarchy, and that's the basic magic.
Exactly. And the way we do compensation at the company is we try to assess like what kinds of contributions are people making, like how much output that's of value, not just working hard. Like how hard of problems can we give them? How good are they at making product level decisions? Could we hang a whole feature on them, hang a whole project
Nice.
on them?
Oh, wow.
And are they good at making other people better? Do they do this kind of group contribution? And usually output and group contribution are trade-offs. Like somebody who's like writing a ton of code or producing a lot of art isn't probably going to be the person who has the time to go and run the schedule for people. And so there's a trade-off there. So even you're going to find somebody who maxes out all these categories. And so overall, we try to assess where we have the peers assess each other and say, Joe Schmo's the most productive programmer we have, couldn't do a project without, and like you want that, but like there isn't like sort of like a bell curve applied to it or any kind of like Jack Welch fire the 10% at the bottom. There's just a little bit of evaluation that we use to do compensation that's generated by the peer groups because we don't have a hierarchy. But
Nice.
like overall, like, the best programmers, no matter what they're doing in the company, get paid about the same, and the best artists get paid about the same, and the entry levels get paid about the same. And we try to make it, selectively downvoting any type of person in the company. I mean, look, we do have the people who work at the front desk, the people who manage outside support, the people who do facilities. Yeah, they're probably not paid as well as the programmers. They don't expect to be paid as well as the programmers, but they're treated like first-class employees. That just their compensation sort of is in line with market. I mean, the interesting thing, going back to the Meta thing, the interesting thing that happened in the labor market, and I'm sure you saw this here in Seattle in particular, is you had during COVID like this complete run-up on the compensation requirements, and like I would say a
Plus
lot
the
of
bloat.
very
How many people we added?
very mercenary compensation negotiation going on that was completely out of touch with the value creation ability of people. And so, we obviously had to pay market rate to get really good people, but we were always very skeptical of people who were very narrow, but came in and asked for like huge compensation packages. I mean, not to say we wouldn't take a risk here or there, but a lot of times the conversation would be like, well, okay, you're asking for a lot and we're going to pay you that. But if you don't deliver that, it's going to be a painful, bumpy ride.
Yeah.
And like, I think hopefully that sort of comes back down to normal, that now that the bigger players have stopped. I think there was sort of like, it was like the tulip bubble of tech talent.
I have a trivia on Meta. According to Mark Zuckerberg, since its inception, more than 1 million metaverse avatars have been created.
I believe.
And half of the people who use Meta Quest VR headset every day spend how much time in the virtual realm? I'm going to give you 4 choices. 30 minutes, 1 hour, 6 hours, 12 hours.
Half of those people,
Yeah.
1 hour.
You nailed it.
They right now, I think we're getting better, but they right now they're hot and uncomfortable, and you start, unless the experience is we found out a bunch of things about what make people sick, and if the frame rate is hitchy or the tracking is not like very low latency, people get nauseated like really fast. And so after an hour, unless that software is very, very good, you're going to have enough accumulated sort of like, it's like getting
enough bump
G fatigue or something, or bumps or something, or it's like getting car sick a little bit. And so people just, I think naturally there's a limit. I think the dream of the metaverse is that people spend their whole working day in this thing, or it's just on all the time. But I don't know if, we're just so far from that. It's just hard to take it that seriously.
That's why also like when Microsoft and Accenture made this whole move on like Azure Mesh, and they were like, we're all going to have avatars and we're going to have meetings in there. I was like, why? I'll be more distracted than ever before. I just make my call, just a freaking phone call, and then we go back to our work.
I mean, it's interesting if you think about...
It's gimmicky to an extent right now, right?
Think about COVID, right? So pre-COVID, if you had business in Tokyo or Seoul, Korea, you got on a plane and did that flight, even if you turned around and flew back the same day. And then COVID comes along and we're sort of told to shelter in place at home, and all of a sudden everybody's on Zoom. And in a lot of ways, there was a huge disruption to that business travel market, and people said, oh, you know what? This is actually way better time efficiency wise and almost as good as being person to person. But then you get to the end of it and people are
fatigued with that.
With it, and they want to go back to something in the middle. But I don't think we'll ever go back to like flying to Tokyo for a 4-hour meeting for the most part. I think we're going to do that with video conferencing. But like a lot of the sort of like local stuff, I think people are wanting to get back into the office. Now, Valve is very interesting. We never had a policy before COVID about being in the office or not, and we're not going to start having one because again, it's one of those top-down things we're just not going to do. People have naturally gravitated to being because they like to be around their peers, but not everybody on every day, right?
Where are you now in terms of numbers?
On any day, I'd say maybe half the company is in.
But that's because of the culture you built and the people you hired. If you hire team players, people want to be around them. They'll want to hang out with them and do the thing that I learned. Like, so this is an interesting dichotomy that I've seen culturally between, Google and Microsoft, because I worked at both. Microsoft, people didn't really hang out after work. They were like, you're my work person. That's it. Goodbye. Separation of church and state.
Yeah, I think in the early days that I think it was maybe different, but
well, now it's completely, it's in that.
And at Google, you see it.
Google, well, because Google, it's just like the people that they hire, especially the engineers, they're so passionate about wanting to solve problems. I will go through the cafeteria and I will hear them be like, so this is my code today. What do you think I should do? Like it's so fun though, because they like their peers' opinions. There's less ego. That's a huge thing, and maybe that's the thing at the Valve where like if you remove ego, you're like, oh my God, these people I can get along with. Because I think one of the biggest problems we have in the workplace where politics and gossip comes from.
It's because if the workplace is what you call like a zero-sum workplace where your advancement comes at somebody else's detriment, then you have problems.
There you go.
Where if everybody can succeed together and move forward together, and there isn't like this person's upside is that person's downside going on, which sounds more like what Google is doing. I think Microsoft is trying to get there, but I think you're in a much happier place with employees because they don't feel like collaboration can be used as a weapon against them.
Yeah.
They feel like smart people around them are just going to make them smarter. I think we've always tried.
It's the sharpening of the iron component, right? Iron sharpens iron.
Give us some tips for people who are in gaming, in the careers. 2-3 questions, but they're all kind of the same frame. New technology is coming all the time. New trends are happening, right? It's a very fierce competitive market. What gives you the edge?
The opportunity in any software space, particular games, is really what we call an arbitrage of talent. Like Valve has always viewed the games and the ideas for the games as not the interesting thing. The people at the company are sort of the opportunity. And so we talked about sort of this arms race of hiring engineers during COVID. And we sort of avoided that because really it's more about once you're, what I would say, once your A-level people start like just trying to accumulate headcount and they start hiring B-level people, then those people start taking over hiring and they start hiring C-level people, and then you're a failed company pretty darn quickly. And so we just have avoided sort of the accumulation of people who don't kind of jibe with the way we run the company. And I will say it's not the easiest company to operate in if you need structure, right? The company is just we do try to be intentional about onboarding people and giving them a suggested first project that they can succeed at. Not something so big or trying to move the company by themselves in some direction, because that's kind of hard to do. That they succeed and they kind of understand how the company works, and they finally, after 6 months, usually let down their gardens like, okay, I see how I can operate here and I can actually rely on my peers to help me as opposed to playing political games. You know, at the end of the day, there's probably some politics that we try to squash out when we see it, and we don't want to be adding process all the time to eliminate that. So we just try to call it when we see it, say, hey, you're doing the really bad thing.
And anybody can call it, right?
Anybody can call it out and surface it. I mean, a lot of times, I don't know if you've had this experience, like when an employee comes into your office and closes the door and say, I want to talk to you about another employee, my natural reaction is to be very skeptical of the person coming with the problem, that they're playing a game. And I think if you, and they may be telling you the absolute truth, where usually there are two sides to anything, but they're trying to run a play is what I would say on you. And you have to be always careful about going out and doing a little more research before any action happens, right?
What would you do in those situations?
I would sort of like want to know, why is this particular person surfacing this particular issue to me? First, is it a real issue? And does this person have an agenda? And hopefully the answer is no, and there's not a real issue. But if it is a real issue, then I think you've got to do more research inside the company. And like without the structure at Valve, firing people is sort of a really harsh thing that happens, but it has to be at the consensus of people they work with.
I want to ask you a question which is actually a little deeper. So when we talk about teams, there is concept of team synergy. Some teams have more synergy than others, right? There are scientific ways now to figure that out. There's psychology, personality types, how people learn, how they behave with others, how they communicate. Do you folks use any of that to build dream teams, or do you let it happen, or is it part of your screening?
I think we let it happen. I think there's probably a lot of space to be intentional about it. But usually, I was sort of describing before that the sort of like strike team of varied backgrounds comes together and sort of starts to get a prototype going, and people naturally gravitate towards the things they think they could be the most valuable adding to. And so I think the teams just naturally coalesce. There typically inside Valve, there hasn't been only like one person who does X, where every successful team must have that one person. Because that's, another example we call the single point of failure. And we don't want to have single points of failure with personnel within the company. So when we find somebody in that role, we try to like get them help, because usually they're overworked at that point and they're feeling like they can't take any time off because everything dies on the vine if they're not there.
I was trying to go deeper on personality type versus skill. Like you have a type A.
So I sort of mentioned
Yeah.
it before. It's the
Yeah.
type that doesn't need the structure. So they manage their own schedule. When they finish a task, if they don't know what to do next, they're able to go out and canvass the team and say, what do you think the most valuable thing I could do is? And they usually have some idea. I could do this, I could do that, I could do this other.
You're looking for entrepreneurs, but with that.
I mean, I think
mindset.
that's actually the perfect analogy. And so one of the things we think about with employees at Valve is that they all could go do their own startups.
Oh, that's cool.
So how do we
That's
how do we
really-
provide them with the ability to do a startup with inside Valve is the way I would say it. Like if they have an idea for something really cool that's remotely in the game space, of course, if they want to go build like the best cat litter cleaner robot, maybe that's not a Valve thing. But if they have an idea for a game, it's always like, well, how do we figure out
How do you incubate that? And
how to do this? And again, it goes back to that thing of like, okay, they need to go talk to a few people. Let's go build a prototype. I think it's perfectly fine. I mean, Google always had the 20% time.
they still do.
To pull. I think we just naturally take, hey, I'm going to take a few weeks and build a prototype of something really
Perfect.
cool. Don't ask me any questions because I don't want to spoil what I show you. And let me go do that. And I think this could be a new business for the company. Like what we don't want to do is have people be so constrained by thinking about like, oh, it has to be as big as the Counter-Strike business or the Steam business or you have to like allow for sort of
Let it
smaller
blossom.
efforts and let them blossom.
How would you coach or advise people that maybe want to get into the gaming space, like to the job?
That's
Go
a
ahead.
great. I get this question a lot, and like in the early days, I actually wrote a whole document. It was for the child of a friend of mine, whose kid was interested. Now it's a little bit easier because there are colleges like DigiPen, which is a local college. I think Nintendo started it, but it's a vocational 4-year degree in how to make games. If you're really serious about games, I would do something like that.
So you don't have to go to a 4-year degree type of a deal.
No, I mean
no?
like college. When we have candidates come in and interview, college tells me a couple things: that they can finish what they start and that they know how to learn new things. It doesn't tell me they know how to do anything that's domain specific to making games. So
Fascinating.
you asked the
Okay.
question of how you get
Just
into
the
games,
basics.
and I think the basics of how to get into games is to go make games. Now, it can be a copy of Tetris on your iPhone that you've learned how to use some do a little programming, do a little bit of art or whatever it is, and you just have to rinse and repeat on that so that when you walk into an interview at a company like Valve, you can say, well, I made these games and here's an example of my code. And then we usually will ask you in the technical interviews to write a little bit of code on the whiteboard, but it's very high level pseudocode. Or if you're on the design, if you're interested in game design, we ask you to design your way out of some gameplay scenario. Again, it's very like abstract widgety. So you have to be comfortable thinking in those ways. I go back and forth about whether the way we do tech interviews is actually effective. Right. But it's the way we've done them. It was born out of the Microsoft experience of the early founders of Valve. We've calibrated those sets of problems really well against many, many candidates. We have reinforcement bias about the people we actually hire succeeding with those problems, even though there's no way to measure. The ones we turned away probably would have been better if we hadn't asked the stupid questions we asked. The landscape changes, right? Like the things that you had to learn 20 years ago are almost completely different. I'm thinking about from a program point of view, yes, we're still writing C++ code and Python, but you have to know open source frameworks and like Git, and you have to know now you have to know like Chat GPT code, Copilot or whatever else it is, which is pretty interesting. So that that stuff changes, but I actually think that's the interesting part about being an engineer is that you're all constantly confronted with new tools to accomplish the task. But fundamentally, the task is solving the puzzle of how to get the thing to happen.
AI piece, and you kind of mentioned the Chat GPT word there as well. What types of AI are you exploring already in Valve and even outside? Where is it? What's it going to do?
In the games like TensorFlow, so that we use it in Dota in a particular way, which is to predict based on the current gameplay state who's going to win. And so we show that in live. So we have enough games recorded that we've run through that we could sort of use sort of the AI big data kind of stuff for it. The other thing we did was we partnered with OpenAI back way in the early days to have it train based on Dota an AI that could beat like a professional human player. And they did it, but I don't want to know how much compute they threw at that problem. But it was along their arc to get to where they are now. Now, ChatGPT is sort of like this existential question for every company right now, although maybe it should or shouldn't be. It's very interesting technology, but also superficial, I would say, in a way, and it's like a hallucinating engine. And
that's not what you would use inside a company.
But hello.
GPT is different versus like the GPT-4s and like the Dollies.
GPT-4. I mean, they're
gaming is superficial too, so
gaming
we're okay.
So what the thing I worried, the question is, how is Valve going to not be disrupted in its fundamental business by the developments of ChatGPT-4, of the AI models that are coming down the pike? And I think it's a hard question of how should we be leveraging AI right now? Yeah. Because the company has been built with people who are very good at generating this sort of world and narrative and art that fits sort of this theme that goes along. And I think these AI systems are very good at mimicking that. But what I worry about always is if you said, I'm going to throw all the NPC talking for this character at that engine. You have to remember that ChatGPT is only text, right? And so it's not the synthesis of things that we need in games anyway, that you would get something out of it that superficially reads like a game, but it's probably devoid of any soul. Yeah. Like a soul in the way that like a designer intentionally created this dialogue tree or whatever it is. And so it's trying to figure out how to use it in ways where you don't fall into that. And so the other side, I sort of mentioned the Copilot thing, I think as an adjunct to people in the way we develop games, there's probably a bunch of
use it as an assistant or just
as
to kind of help you.
I mean, for coders, it's obvious how it sort of assists or sort of writes buggy code. And then for artists, like the Stable Diffusion thing is very interesting. And we used to spend, I mean, I think the Photoshops of the world do a lot of the stuff automatically, how you tile textures and stuff like that. But I think it could be useful really for non-artists to generate sort of like good enough art to get, for us, the polish level is so high, maybe we're not a great example, but I think like on the casual game side, there'll probably be some very interesting AI-driven games. So far, they haven't really panned out that way. And so I think it's a wait and see a little bit. And like Gabe, our founder, is very, very interested in this and poking really hard at us to make sure we're not sort of like on railroad tracks, tied down with a locomotive coming at us. And the locomotive is GPT-4. Because we talked to Sam Altman a bunch. He's a super interesting guy to talk to. But like, I don't know how it directly applies to the sort of fundamental way we make games yet. Do I think there's something interesting there? There's absolutely something cool there, right?
It could definitely help you with the narrative and the storytelling and building out arcs and character plots.
Or making sure they're consistent. Or tell me, now that this stuff has happened, like, what is the story of this guy? And it's really good at that. The problem is you look at that as a human and you say, that's good. But like you discard the 9 out of 10 that are like, and so if you just didn't have the human coming in and saying that's cool, like we have this bias to remember when it did the cool thing. Oh, I got ChatGPT to do this really cool thing. We forget like how frustrating it was to prompt engineer it to do the right thing. And so I worry about deploying it in a real-time system and it just goes off the rails and does something, for us it would be super unfun, right? And like, so it's like being able to harness that in the live thing would be, I think, the hard thing. So the assistant side makes a little bit more sense. And thinking about and then like who gets to train these models is very interesting.
Yeah.
And I think there's a little bit, companies used to do this where they would announce version 2 of something to stop their competitor from building. Only OpenAI and maybe Google or Microsoft can train these models because they're so compute intensive. But I think that means that those models are probably a dead end in a way. And like, it really needs to be something that any company can build some variation of. If technology needs to get to that point where anybody can kind of train whatever it is they want to get out of it locally, as opposed to saying only the big guys can.
So I'm gonna ask 2 things. First, just short answer: is Valve hiring? All right, so people will make sure we'll post it out there, have them reach out. 2 is, can you describe for us in one sentence what you think the future of gaming looks like?
I think the connection to a powerful back end. So even a single player experience, I think, will be connected to some kind of server on the back end that's generating a unique experience for the player, as opposed to sort of I think the future is going to be less sort of packaged like on a rail narrative and more sort of procedural narrative. And I think the multiplayer games will continue to dominate.
Okay. And my last thing is, this is your chance to highlight any opportunities you've got going on, philanthropic, passion projects you'd love people to participate in. Share those and ways for people to reach out and get in touch with you.
I mean, there's stuff locally that my wife and I are involved with. Like we're we're co-hosting the Overlake Hospital Bandage Ball in May. It's our local hospital for most of the valve people. It's a great community asset, and it's one of the few independent hospitals remaining in the state. So it's like one of these things I think is important to support. We're very involved with cancer research as well through the Fred Hutch and other groups. With racing, I've been involved with Race for RP, which is a foundation about relapsing polychondritis, which is a very, very debilitating cartilage disorder that sort of inflames. It can be fatal for men in particular because your esophagus cartilage gets attacked. And so one of the other racers, Neil Langberg, and his wife are very involved with that effort because one of the family members suffers from it. And so I think continuing to highlight that, like the racing is all for fun, but the sort of like anytime I get on interviewed for racing, I talk about that effort because I think it's the important thing. That we're out there having fun with the race cars, but we're at least raising awareness, trying to raise. We do some charity races with that, try to raise money for those efforts.
And if people want to reach out to you about some of this stuff, LinkedIn or
email is fine. It's Yahn, YAHN @valvesoftware.com.
Okay, well, you heard that first. He's accessible, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Yahn, for being here.
Thank you for having me.